My life as a concert pianist was interrupted by a traumatic accident, but it taught me incredibly invaluable lessons about recovery and moving forward. In the early 1990s, I was recording with major London orchestras. I had management, and I was really enjoying the rewards of a career, a dream career. 1994 was no different. I was really busy. I was traveling back and forth between New York and Paris. I was studying with the last surviving pupil of Maurice Ravel. Some of you might know who he is. And once a month, I was flying to LA to record soundtracks with Maurice Jarre, who is, of course, the legendary composer for most of David Lean's movies. I also was preparing to go to Europe. I was going to Germany and to England, and I was doing a world premiere of a piano concerto that was written for me by Chen Yu, starting with the Brooklyn Philharmonic. But all of that came to an end on April the 7th in that same year. On that day, I went to my regular monthly shiatsu appointment, laying face down on a table. My therapist, with whom I worked many, many times, began to work on me, and she loosened me up just with her hands for about 30 minutes. For some strange reason, she was called out, and when she went out, I could hear her distinctive chatter. You know, she had a very distinctive voice. So I could hear her in the hallway, animatedly talking to someone. But when she returned, she tripped over something, maybe the threshold or a pillow, and she fell directly on my spine, in the middle of my spine. And then she continued to work on me. It didn't hurt that much when it happened because I was already 30 minutes into the massage. So she continued her work, which involved walking on my back. So there's a pole in the middle of the ceiling, and she doesn't walk right on your spine, of course, but she very gently would walk a little bit on either side of the spine. And I guess my body was seizing up at this point, and she commented and she said, "I really need to manipulate your neck." And I said, "Please don't do that. I've never had that done." And she did it, and she did some very serious damage. At that point, I didn't really know what to do. I went home, I put some ice on it. Days followed. I was in really, really terrible pain. I was very uncomfortable, and I couldn't really function. But then I started noticing some really horrible things. First, my left leg stopped working well. I was dragging and tripping on a lot of things in my left leg. And then I started to lose control of my fourth and fifth fingers in my left hand. My right hand was absolutely fine, but my left hand wasn't. And I was playing a piece by Maurice Ravel called Le Tombeau de Couperin, and the prelude requires that your right hand and left hand do these little mirror images of each other, and my left hand just could not mirror my right. So I knew something was really, really wrong. At that point, I really didn't know what was wrong with me, and I didn't know until I went to MRIs. And they kept asking me, they said, "Have you been in a very serious car accident?" And I said, "No, I wasn't in a car accident." But then I started to put two and two together, and I realized it was traceable back to this accident in the massage therapy. The physical discomfort and the emotional roller coaster took a lot of toll on me, and it also ended my marriage of 12 years. So at that point, needless to say, I was devastated, and I was also terrified because I really did not know what was going to happen to me. Unexpectedly, at the moment, the worst moment, when I couldn't walk, I couldn't play, I was in horrible pain, I was all alone, I got this incredible phone call of an offer to live in a beautiful London flat to recuperate. So I thought, I'm gonna take this offer, I'm gonna move there, get away from everything that I know, and I'm going to fully concentrate on recovery. My first task in London was to put together a team of people who could help me recover. As a visitor, it's really great to know. I mean, in the 90s, you could go to London and get into the NHS, and then I paid a little bit extra for Bupa, which was a private health care. It was like 30 bucks a month, and I got some sensational treatment, and I got access to some wonderful people. One really interesting meeting I had was in Paris. I decided to go to Paris to see doctors at the Institute of the Hand, because I was really most concerned about my hand. I thought my leg would recover, and you know, so what if I limp a little to this piano, but I really couldn't live without my hand. So I went to Paris, and the doctors there were very kind, and they measured the damage, the distance between the herniated disc and my C4-5 to the tips of my fourth and fifth fingers, and they said, this is going to take up to 7 years for you to recover. My first thought was then, my whole career is absolutely over. I mean, 7 years is a long time not to play. And so, of course, I became completely enraged. I was determined to prove these doctors wrong. I focused fully on getting back to my old self, but that never happened. These are the 5 lessons that I have learned. Lesson number 1, you never go back to your old self. The body will heal, but it'll never be the same. The first hurdle for me, and the most difficult one in the beginning, was to accept that these changes were permanent, and I had to learn to adapt to them. My willingness to fully embrace this reality was a key to my moving forward. If I was to perform again, I had to work with my limitations. I couldn't sit or stand for more than 10 minutes. And my left hand was uncoordinated, and I developed a tremor, which I still have today. I had to decide now what I was going to do. The second lesson, I had to come up with an idea so gobsmackingly crazy and inspiring that it would motivate me to get better. So the thought came up of presenting an evening of Maurice Ravel's piano music surrounded by paintings that he himself knew. My love of art began right here in Vince Scully's class. I'm sure many of you took that. It was a life-changing class, which for me was literally an eye-opener. For this performance, I could carefully select pieces that I knew I could play, or maybe rearrange a bit so I didn't have to put so much pressure on my left hand. And most importantly, I could stand up in between each piece, so long as it wasn't too long, and talk about the Impressionist paintings. Vince would have been very proud of me. So in April 1996, 2 years after the accident, with my left hand only at 80%, I gave my first informants. I came up with a new word in London at the Courtauld Galleries, surrounded by a world-class collection of Impressionist paintings. I talked to Citibank into sponsoring the event, and they also paid for the transport of a beautiful 19th century French grand piano called an Erard, which now sits in my living room. The piano turned out to be a major part of my recovery. It has a very light action, and it's much, much easier to navigate than a modern Steinway, which can get quite heavy. So it's much, much less fatiguing for me to play. Citibank was so happy with this concert, they partnered me in 2 more, and they gave me an artist in residency for the Hamlet schools, on Canary Wharf. Lesson number 3, the work never ends. This type of injury requires maintenance, vigilance, and extreme discipline. 30 years after the accident, I still need to work with specialists, and I maintain a really strict regimen of walking, swimming, and exercise in a gym. In 1999, I moved back to the States, married, and settled down in Berkeley. My next goal was to record the complete works of Ravel on this beautiful historic French piano, but not until I felt my hand was functioning at 90% plus. Ravel's piano music, if some of you may know it, is extremely intricate. It's very complicated, very athletic, and it requires nimble hands and stamina. These attributions loomed large before me, but I knew with my discipline and diligence, I could meet my goal. Lesson number 4, celebrate each step in any recovery with a special project or 2. In June 2000, as a test of my physical strength, I drove a 1940 Chevy over 28 days from Istanbul to Beijing in the first ever timed vintage car rally. Let me just hit this button so you can, did it come up, anything? No, there. Yeah, there we are. I was a last-minute sub for a driver who dropped out, and I always wanted to travel the Silk Road. Road conditions varied greatly as we made our way through Turkey, Russia, and China. Most nights, I could be found under the car. dealing with its mechanical issues as opposed to my mechanical issues. I gained back so much of my confidence on this trip and knew that before long I would be able to achieve my goal of recording the Ravel. Do I hit this thing again for the next picture? I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Just let me know which next one is. You're good.
I can't do it. Go ahead and push it. In July 2001, 7 years, as predicted by the French doctors at the Institute of the Hand, I recorded the complete works of Ravel on the historic keyboard with my left hand at about 90%. I need you again. Can you come back? I need you all the time.
No, this will be right here.
I have since recorded 7 more CDs and have returned to performing regularly. I continue to give performances, and I've raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for charities, and I record podcasts, most recently one for Sports Illustrated on how to deal with performance anxiety. The final lesson, you have to forgive those who hurt you. The accident was just that. It was an accident. I was unlucky. It could have been somebody else. I've had the love and support. You can hit the next slide. I've had the love and support from so many who walked with me through dark times. I'm so very grateful, and I thank you all for listening to my story.